discretionary funding is notoriously complicated, especially for, especially for religious organizations. And just because of the manner of everything with city council funding, obviously you try to have a project that is public facing more than anything else. But just to go over it a little bit, and I will describe how religious organizations fit into the process. This is the presentation that they use for general trainings at the finance division at the city council. But this is for fiscal year 2023. And if any of your organizations have gone through the sort of process in the last 2 fiscal years, it should be relatively similar. There shouldn't be any sort of differences. But to get started, what is discretionary funding? So in the simplest terms, discretionary funding is a sum of money appropriated to each council member and or caucuses or delegations within the city's expense budget allocated to eligible not-for-profit organizations. Eligible in the sense that, of course, if you're a for-profit organization, you cannot receive this funding. And there are also some other sort of criteria that we'll get into it. And an important note is that discretionary funding is reimbursement based. So it's not like the city council will just give you the money up front. Each organization has to have the ability to sort of use the money up front and then get reimbursed by it from the specific agency that is allocating these funds. Next, let's see. Who is eligible for discretionary funding? So like I said before, discretionary funds may only be allocated to not-for-profit community-based service providers. In order to receive these funds, an organization has to be incorporated as a non-for-profit within it and has its own and must have its own employer identification number, which is an IN number given by the IRS, and has to be registered with the New York State Attorney General's Charities Bureau, unless it is exempt. And if you're exempt, you probably already know that you are. But if you need to know more, there's a link on the screen that I can provide later that can give you more information about that. But those are the 2 big sort of requirements for each organization to be eligible for discretionary funds, that it has to be registered as and incorporated as a non-for-profit, has its own EIN number, and has to be registered with the New York State Attorney General's Charities Bureau. So those 2 requirements are very big. And if you don't fit in those requirements, you're not eligible to get discretionary funding. Religious or affiliated organizations, and this is what is most important in this call, are eligible. A lot of people think that because they are religious, they're not eligible. That is not true. In general, these sort of funding sources are allocated for projects that are public purpose driven. So to describe that, a public purpose is defined as an activity or service that is open to all members of the public. Religious organizations must prove that this project or the project they want to fund, the program or whatever, is open to all members and does not specifically promote the religion in its sort of programming. Of course, there is a sort of murky sort of line here. I was raised Christian, right? And so I was taught that all my actions were sort of promoting the religion, promoting the love of God. However, it's not like I could be funded, right? And explicitly say in that program, like, hey, see, I'm going to give you this service, or I'm going to provide you this service, but you must come to another event, like a particularly religious event. So, of course, you have to kind of curtail it to being as public facing as possible. And this applies to all sort of religious affiliated organizations. We want to make sure that the funds given by city council members are, as open as possible for everyone as possible. So going forward, again, can apply. For-profit entities may not receive discretionary funds. This would be a huge breach of sort of, what we're trying to do at the city council. And so how to apply for discretionary funding. Applications are submitted online. So, I know some people are kind of used to way back when we did paper sort of applications, but thank God all of this is online now. It's much more simple. The release date was, of course, January 3rd. And like I said before, it's due at 11:59 on February 22nd, 2022. This is the due date that we require everyone to submit everything for. And if you do not get this in by that date, unfortunately, the portal is closed and there's no sort of way that I know of to get the application in the system. And if it's, let's say it's 11:59 and you're coming down to it and there's a technical issue with the computer, always reach out to your council person to see if there's some sort of way that you can do this. But to my understanding, that due date is concrete. So please get your applications in on time. In fiscal year 2023, they've added the option allowing the applicants to either start a new application or to access an in progress or submitted applications. To my understanding, if you start one and then you leave it there and save it, you can go back on the city council website to access it. But it's my recommendation just to go at it at one go, so you don't forget any sort of passwords, you don't forget any sort of things in the process. But yeah, there's a link. And again, I will provide this presentation. I'll provide the link after the call as well. There are several different types of discretionary funding in this sort of expense process. And this kind of can get a little bit convoluted, but just to explain very simply, the member items or member discretionary for each council member, there are 51 council members in the city. Each one is designated 4 pots, what we call them. There is a type of funding called local funding or local initiative. This is your general sort of funding source for any sort of program that the council member wants to apply. So there's not some sort of unique criteria that you have to pertain to. There is youth programming. So, programming that is particularly denoted for youth programs. Think after school programs, daycare centers, programs around educating the youth, things like that. And similarly, there's an aging pot. So this is for the members of the elderly, anything that is trying to help them out, any sort of programs that are educating them as well. So it's kind of like youth, just for another age-specific, group of people. And then lastly, there's anti-poverty. And this is, of course, any sort of initiative by an organization that is attempting to help curtail the sort of the effects of low income status. Next, there is what we call speaker funding. And so obviously, the speaker of the city council has a lot more discretion with the funding that we receive. And so these are for projects that cost a lot more than normal expense projects. Every council member has a allocation, correct? And so there's a finite amount of organizations that we can fund. If your project is, high in value, if it costs a lot of money, we can, if you meet with us, we can, suggest to the speaker to fund that project as a part of their discretionary portion. So this is a little bit of a higher level kind of thing. But once you are meeting with your council members, there is a potential for being allocated the speaker funding or being nominated to receive that speaker funding. Next, and this is probably the second most important one for your organizations, are member designated initiatives. And these are specific initiatives or programs allocated after budget adoption, which is later in the year around the middle of summer, with a specific purpose and guidelines that are equally split and designated by each council member. So if you have organizations that, for example, strive to, plant trees and create sort of environmental consciousness, that might qualify for a Greener NYC grant. Food pantries have their own grant as well. There are sort of other things like CASA grant, which is particularly curtailed for after school programming for kids. And I can give a PDF that has a little bit more information about these member designated initiatives, but this is also something that you would apply for on the portal. Citywide initiatives, of course, it's sort of the similar thing. These are initiatives created to address different needs across the city that the aforementioned pots of funding might not readily address. And these sort of initiatives, you would meet with specific committees and be sponsored by specific council members. And again, if you reach out to your council member's office, they will walk you through this process and give you the context that you need. And then lastly, borough-wide initiative. This is funding that is designated by a borough delegation. My council member, Christopher Marte, is the chair or co-chair of the Manhattan delegation. And so I know from our end, the process for applying through the delegation isn't decided yet. I'm not sure if this is the same for the Bronx, Queens, or Staten Island, but I reckon that we'll get a little bit more information as the weeks come along. Going forward, what is the vetting process? So this is a little bit more convoluted, but it is essentially seeing if an organization is in fact in qualification with those two qualities that we're looking for. One, does the organization have an employer identification number from the IRS? And two, is it registered with the Charities Bureau? There are several forms that you're going to be filling out on the application process. There's an authorization form, very simple to fill out, though it must be notarized, and it can be notarized and signed electronically. There's a conflict of interest form that you might need to fill out if, for example, I went to one of your churches or was a participant in one of those programs, which I don't think applies right here. There's an affiliation form as well that's a little bit similar. And these will come much more clear when you go through the application. Two sort of important notes here. Newly created organizations, which I'm not sure applies here, but organizations that have been incorporated within the last 2 fiscal years may not receive funding in excess of 20,000 total and no more than 10,000 per single member. New to the council, organizations that have not received funding in the past 3 fiscal years from the city council may not receive funding in excess of 50,000 total and no more than 25 from a single member. And so these 2 bullet points are important to write down. And of course, when you look through the presentation, I wish they would have bolded it, because a lot of organizations come to us asking for, let's say $60,000 or like 30,000 from me and then 30,000 from another council member. And we have to sadly say, no, we have to alter those numbers because you're either new or you're new to the council. And so if you are new to the council or a newer organization, just please keep that in mind so you can save yourself some time and not have to like meet with different organizations or meet with different council members just to hear no or something like that. Again, compliance with the Attorney General's Charities Bureau, super important. And also in the vetting process, of course, the review of an organization's past agency evaluations. One thing with the pandemic that we're looking for is the ability for an organization to switch from virtual to in-person programming at a moment's notice. Something that happened a lot in the last couple fiscal years was that organizations were actually left money on the table. Their reimbursement allocations were not able to be used all the way because they had to switch, unfortunately, from in-person to virtual programming, which sometimes cost a little bit less. And so, even with new organizations, we look for organizations that are very flexible in terms of their funding source, in the sense that we look that they can actually use those funds. Furthermore, of course, we vet on news articles, social media, the internet. We want to make sure that these organizations are, in at least on face value, actually, living out the values that they profess to do. This is an important thing. Think of it as a sort of like, if you're applying for a job, right, you obviously want to have a social media presence that isn't sort of looking bad on your employer. In this sense, we want to, give and help out organizations that, make New York City, the best city that it can be so that more people can come over here and participate and enjoy the city. Going forward, this is sort of a little bit more technical than the rest, but one of the aspects of the application, and this is how we sort of see how the organizations might be, qualified or not, is the passport system. And so this helps organizations be trained in sort of the allotment of funds, and it explains the process a little bit more thoroughly. This is a link that you will have at the end of the conversation or at the end of the presentation and at the resources that I'm going to provide. But this is how they sort of allot the different contracts and just set up everything with your organization. And just to note, a capacity building training is required for CBOs or organizations receiving more than $10,000. So if you do receive more than $10,000 in terms of your reimbursement, you're required to get this sort of training, which is very important. And a very important note that a lot of people miss is that this training is tied to one particular person. So let's say a member of your organization, let's say the president or the CEO or whoever it may be, did this training. If they were to leave that training would leave with them. And so let's say they left, you would have to allocate, or you would have to designate that another person to have that training. And the training is good for 3 years. So, after 3 years, things might change. You might want to do the training again because that is going to make you eligible yet again for more than $10,000. When will an organization receive their funding? So just to explain, number one, an organization submits their discretionary application to the council. This is everything that I was talking about before. Then the organization creates an account and is registered with the passport system, this sort of pre-qualifying system that I just mentioned on the last slide. The city council then designates an award to the organization in Schedule C. And Schedule C is a document used by city council to sort of denote all of the designations of money, all of the allocations given through that fiscal year. The fiscal year goes through July to June. And so in June, we release Schedule C, and that's where you will see your organization receiving money and whatnot. After that, City Council and the Mayor's Office of Contracted Services perform their review/vetting process and clear the award. After they clear the designation, a list of all clear awards is sent out to the city agencies and comptrollers, and the comptroller. And after this point, this is when you will start seeing the contracts given to each organization. And the rest of the bullet points aren't super important to go over right now, but just to kind of summarize, after that point in which they're all cleared, more sort of correspondence between you and the Mayor's Office of Contracted Services, as well as the agencies, will happen to discuss how exactly the funds will be allocated. And this is just a sort of flow chart of the previously described process of the contracting. And that is pretty much it for the presentation. Again, I'm going to share all of the resources given to me from Finance Division and this presentation as well. And of course, I will, for those organizations in my district, I will drop down my email. For anyone else outside of District 1, I would heavily suggest to go ahead and to contact your council member, because everyone has different sort of processes. Some offices, I know our office has a supplemental form, which is a PDF just describing the different programs that everyone has. In addition, other offices might have that as well, or different processes altogether. So I'm going to stop sharing and open it up to questions. Again, most of the questions, if I can answer them, I will try to. If not, I can go and reach out to the City Council Finance Division and get back to you as soon as possible. Let's see.
Are there any questions? I had a quick question. You said for the member initiatives, they're awarded later in the summer. Is that after this first Schedule C is released in June?
Yes. So y'all will receive a lot more information about these as the time comes. But essentially, member designated initiatives, the purpose is to sort of fill in the gaps that the regular funding was not able to sort of fill in. These are more specific programs. Like, for example, there's one around a immigrant. It's called Cultural Immigrant Initiative, that goes out to educate people and help immigrants out with a variety of different educational programs. So a lot of organizations like to apply for that. This comes out after adoption, so around July, August, and that's when members can go ahead and designate certain organizations for those funds. And of course, you apply for them during this application process. So if your organization wants to apply for one of those, if they have a program that they think would apply for one of these member designated initiatives, go ahead and you can. There's a space in the application where you can say, I want to receive this program, or I want to apply for this program, so that in July or in August when we're reviewing, we can meet with that organization and investigate a little bit further and see if we can designate it into what is called a transparency resolution, which is essentially another resolution passed to edit the Schedule C that was passed in July. So throughout the year, people are, the city council is editing the budget. And so those member designated initiatives happen later into the fiscal year.
All right, great. That's really helpful.
Mhm.
All right, were there any final questions?
Thank you.
Just quickly, is there in the future another round, like in a couple of years, like if you miss this deadline?
So the discretionary funding happens every year. So it is opened up in January and it ends in February. But throughout the year, you can always have sort of meetings with your city council person to discuss funding requests for the next year. But it happens every year. There's not to worry. Like, it's not like it's never going to happen until like 4 years from now. So you have, it's like clockwork, to be honest.
Okay.
And throughout the year, there are other sort of programs that you can apply for, like the member designated initiative. But, I would suggest you lose nothing if you apply. Just go ahead and put your application in there. If you don't get it, unfortunately, you don't get it. But it's good to show consistency, and you never know, you might actually receive the money. One thing I will say is that this year is special because a lot of council people are new. And so a lot of them are going to want to change their allocations. Some organizations are sort of they're sort of scared to apply because the general consensus is that council members will continue to fund the same organizations year after year. But because people are new, including my own council member, a lot of times we want to change the direction that funding goes to. Makes it more equitable. We disagree with something from the previous administration, so it's always important to apply, I think. And yeah, like you said, or like you were talking about, happens every year.
All right, great. So thank you so much for taking the time. I know our group has dwindled a little bit, but we're going to provide this as a recording, and we'll also send out your PowerPoint to everyone. So the full group and more will receive this as a really, really helpful resource. I know you jumped from another meeting to this one, so thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
All right, great. So with that, we'll close the meeting.